we have 4 different, I'm going to use the professorial language, units. And within each unit, we're going to have a series of different lectures. The first one is Why Believe in God in an Age of Skepticism. This is something that we can't take for granted. Now, if you dig into the poll numbers, it's interesting because the numbers of atheists are rising, but they're still relatively low. It's more the number of people who are oftentimes referred as the nuns, not the N-U-N-S, but the N-O-N-E-S, the nuns, meaning that they say they have no religion or no religious affiliation. And within them, even some of them claim to be spiritual but not religious. And so what religious skepticism right now is a very complex animal, but there's still an overarching sense in which on the if we take all the evidence together, many believe, there's just, what would be the point of believing in God? It just doesn't seem to be a reasonable proposition anymore. So the first thing that we have to establish is that believing in God is in fact reasonable. And there's in fact good evidence for it, better evidence than the alternative. We need to establish that first before we can build any other layers on top of it. But let's say for the sake of argument we can establish that. Then the question will be, okay, so maybe there's this being, maybe there's this divine being, maybe that it is the case that the universe just didn't pop into existence out of nothing, and that the condition for the possibility of order and structure and meaning in the cosmos must be that there is some being that makes it all possible. So okay, I'll grant you your God. But aren't all religions basically the same? I can't tell you how often I hear that all religions, aren't they basically at the end of the day all telling you basically be nice and believe in some transcendent power? Well, the answer to that is no. All religions aren't the same, but that's not going to be enough. From like a descriptive or empirical perspective, we're going to have to explain what the differences are, and then in relationship to that say, well, why would you then choose to be a Christian? And the answer would be, well, because Christianity is true. Because it appears to be the case that what Christians, what Catholics, from the very beginning have been claiming about God incarnate is in fact the case. That it's not just a collection of symbolic or otherwise mythical narratives intended to convey some kind of abstract truth. It is conveying an abstract truth about the nature of truth, and it also appears the case that it's empirically true, meaning it happened, actually happened. And for that reason, it appears there's good evidence to say, well, this is why I will be a follower of this God-man as well, Jesus the Christ. So you establish that there's good reason to believe that God exists, and then on top of that to say, well, and then there's good reason to believe that God is the Christ. The Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and the Son made incarnate in space and time in the form of the Christ. But then you have to say, okay, well, let's say that we're now Christians, or we now believe that Christianity has good reasons for its existence, for its justification. But why be a Catholic? Isn't diversity the spice of life? Isn't it great that there's so many different denominations? Shouldn't we celebrate the fact that there's 40,000 some different divisions among Christians, people who call them groups that call themselves Christians? The answer to that would be, well, we'd have to establish that there's one form of Christianity among Christianity that is truer or realer or corresponds closer to the actual nature of who God says he is and who God reveals himself to be and the church that God establishes. Now, as I say these words, especially when I'm in professorial mode, I'm almost like scared to say them because I'm thinking, oh boy, what am I going to hear back in return? Fortunately, y'all can't say anything yet. But, and this, I know this is a friendly crowd, but there's so many people who believe that making a truth claim about God, about the nature of existence, about the existence of one group of beliefs being superior to another groups of belief, that in of itself is immoral, that only bad people would say that some ideas are better than others. We're actually going to address that in just a moment. But it remains the case. So again, it's not personal, it's not about trying to demonstrate individual superiority, but if we can establish that God exists, and we can establish that God is incarnate in Jesus the Christ, who was crucified and resurrected, and that same Christ established a particular kind of church that necessarily by definition rules out other kinds of expressions of what the church is, well, then you've come to a conclusion of why it's better to be Catholic, better in the sense of closer to the nature of reality. There doesn't appear to be any other way to formulate it if we can establish that chain of truths. So let's say that we can get that far. Then the question would be, okay, granted that God exists and that God is incarnate in the Christ and that the Catholic Church is the true church of Christ in time and space, well, then how do I live all that out? How do I incarnate that in myself? What's my life look like if, in fact, that's true? And that will be the content of the fourth series of lectures. So we've got a long slog here, but I hope that these four categories will at least give some order and structure as we move forward. So now, finally, the actual content of today's lecture, which is the question, is it still possible to talk about the truth? Now, I know you've all heard this before. You've heard these refrains. There's no such thing as the truth. There's just no truth. Or all truth is relative. It all just depends. It depends on the person. It depends on where you were born. It depends on how you were raised. It depends upon your culture. It depends upon your sex. It depends upon your age. Right? You can just cut it up 1,000 different ways and say that the truth, it just depends upon where you're looking at it from. So all truth is relative. Or we hear people say, well, look, I have my truth and you have your truth, and that's fine, right? We have our truths, and we live our truths in different way. And to say that as if that somehow has some kind of philosophical coherence to it. Or this is one of my favorite, who are you to judge? Who are you to judge what the truth is? I love that one because somebody who says, who are you to judge, is judging that your judging is bad. We'll get to that. But it's another expression of this claim that, look, there's no truth, so why would you think that are you better than everyone else? Because you're Mr. the Truth Man coming up and telling me the truth. Well, Mr. Truth Man, I'm here to tell you there is no truth. So that's another variation. And then it also takes this other form of, do you think you're better than other people? Now, this is an urgent problem today. In fact, I would say the problem of truth in our day and age is probably the greatest problem to which we could attach every other problem that we're currently existing in one form of another. Because once you lose any kind of grounding in truth, or even a shared commitment to identifying truth as truth, then every other effort that we make for any other goal, whatever it may be, political, moral, social, civic, whatever it is, it's going to crumble, right? Because if the foundation dissolves, then anything that we potentially build upon that foundation necessarily will fall too. And it's not just theoretical. It's happening now in so many different ways, including people who can no longer tell themselves why it's worth to be alive. Because they've been told time and time and time and time again that there is no truth. And then they actually start believing that there is no truth. And then they come to the logical conclusion that if there's no truth, there's no point to anything. If there's no point to anything, might as well end it now. And might as well take as many down with me as possible. The sick stuff that we see going on around us has philosophical foundations to it. It doesn't just exist out of a vacuum. So it is an urgent problem. But I also want to recognize that it's an ongoing problem. It's a problem that even has biblical roots. So remember in John 18:37, this is during the trial of Jesus before Pontius Pilate. And Pontius says to Jesus, "So you are a king." And Jesus answers him, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." And Pilate asked him, "What is truth? What is truth?" Now, on the one hand, that could appear like a sympathetic, we can give it a sympathetic reading and say, Pilate's sincerely asking Jesus, no, honestly, what is the truth? Tell me what the truth is. But there's a darker interpretation of it as well, and I think read against the actual passion, what's about ready to happen to Jesus, I think this is probably the more conclusive reading, is that embedded in Pilate's question is a conclusion. It's not a question, it's a conclusion, meaning, look, Jesus of Nazareth, there is no truth. We all know there's no truth. All there is power. All there is violence. All there is domination. All there is one group getting crushed by another group. So why are we going through this whole show trial when in fact we know that this is all a farce anyway? And history put me here in this position as a Roman prefect with power over you, and history put you there as this eccentric religious zealot. So why are we pretending that there's truth? There's actually great wisdom, dark wisdom in Pilate's question here, because he's recognizing implicitly the natural conclusion to the recognition of there not being any truth. If there is no truth, it is just about power. Raw power and the use of violence and any other means necessary we have to dominate each other. So that comes to head right in the passion of our Lord. So this is something that has deep, deep, deep roots, this problem. Now, as we approach the question, we have to make a crucial distinction. And that's a distinction between two different kinds of questions which appear to be similar, but actually have some significant differences that we need to identify up front. So it's one thing to ask the question, is there objective truth? It's another thing to ask the question, what is the objective truth? Now again, those two questions sound very similar, but they point to different kinds of questions that in fact would have different methodologies, meaning how we would go about answering them. You see, it's one thing to answer the question, is there a truth or not? It's yes or no. Yes, there's a truth, or no, there's not a truth. We'll get more to that in just a moment. But then, having established that, then we would have to go about a separate series of arguments, a lifelong series of arguments, to establish what that specific truth is. So what we're going to be focusing on is that first question there. Is there objective truth? Setting aside the what is the content of that truth for future lectures. So we're focusing on that first one here. Is there objective truth? So let's test it. Let's test a statement. So I'm going to make a statement. Let's see if it makes sense. So I'm going to say to you, there is no objective truth. There's no objective truth. There's no such thing as the truth. Now what I want to know, what I want to figure out, is if that makes any sense. Because I can potentially say anything to you, right? I mean, language gives us the capacity to say whatever we will. But the question is what we are saying actually correspond to anything that we could say is coherent or real or makes sense or intelligible? So that's what I want to ask about the statement, there is no objective truth. Now, in order to do that, we need some tools. I'm going to use some logic. Now, don't worry. Don't get anxious about this. I'll be honest here. I opened some logic textbooks long ago in my early education, and I panicked because it's like math. Logic looks a lot like math. It's like word math. And it can seem impenetrable, and it can certainly seem abstruse, and you can begin to say to yourself very quickly, what in the world does this have to do with anything?
Do you want to fall in love with God? I'm sure we all want to. The book of Psalms contains the directions. Thousands of years ago, people like you and me talked to God out of the depths of their hearts, revealing an intimate love. Psalms are the expression of the faith in God by people around 3,000 years ago. God was not a mere abstract creator, but was present, involved, and a real person of power and emotions. Now, when we read or listen to the Psalms, we can know the intensity of this love. Entering into the influence of the Psalms, we can find a path to know and love God. To know more about the Psalms, you should get a copy of Father Mike Manning's booklet, The Psalms. It will help you to understand the 150 Psalms better as he has categorized them. He uses the technique of acts: adoration, contrition, thanksgiving, and supplication. Get your copy today and know the categories. Learn to pray with the Psalms.
Call the number on the screen or email us. You can also get it through our website. Get your copy today.
logic can be and is something immensely complex. But logic is also something that is so natural to us that it's like breathing. So insofar as we sort of know how to breathe without thinking about it, we also know how to use logic without thinking about it. In fact, in order to have any thinking whatsoever, we're already using logic. We can't not use logic. So what I want to do here is not introduce things that you don't actually know. I'm introducing something that you do already know and in fact are very adept at using insofar as you have any thoughts or can make any coherent claims, statements whatsoever. So what are they? The law of identity basically states that everything, these are so basic, you're going to say, wow, these are really profound definitions you're giving me here, Matt. But it's important to bring them up to the surface because there are some who argue that we don't need logic in order to make arguments. So the law of identity is basically saying that everything has one definition. So a thing is, the classical way of expressing the law of identity is to say a thing is what it is, meaning it corresponds with one thing. So to say a square is a square, it's this. To say a circle is a circle, it's this. In order to have any coherent thought or make any coherent statement about it, we have to recognize that the word that we're formulating corresponds to a concept which corresponds to some kind of reality, and it's one thing. Okay, it'll become clear why that's important as we move ahead. The law of non-contradiction says that whatever definition we give something, it cannot include within itself a contradictory characteristic. So we can't say, for example, a circle is a square-like object. Right? That can't be our definition of a circle. Why? Because within the definition itself, there's a claim about the nature of a circle that contradicts the very definition of what a circle is. And so we say, well, you can't do that, right? And in fact, we literally can't do it. I can say it, but we can't even think it. So right now, think of a squarish circle or a circular square. Try and formulate that thought in your head. Your brain's going to rebel against you, right? It's not going to let you do it. It's going to error, right? You're going to have like a oblong-looking figure. It's either going to be roundish or it's going to have angles. You can't do it. So the law of contradiction is basically just putting a name to that impossibility that exists within the structure of our minds. We can't put conceptually opposite things together. The law of identity, the law of the excluded middle is the recognition that whatever definition we give to something, so now I've given something a definition, it doesn't contain any internal contradictions. The law of identity says, look, that definition must either be true or not true. Whatever it is, it's either the case or it's not the case. There's nothing in the middle. So that sounds pretty abstract, so let me give an example of the three laws in action. So I'm going to make a statement to you, another statement. This is the statement. I, Matt, am a married man. So now I want to ask, is that a coherent statement? Is it a statement that's intelligible? Well, let's run it through the three laws of logic. But what the law of identity says to me is that in order for this statement to be intelligible, I have to have a fixed definition of what I means, of what a Matt is. Not only a Matt in terms of somebody being named, but a me. M is, married is, and man. That all of those must correspond with some fixed conceptual property. And the reason is if we don't have a shared definition for something, then we literally can't communicate with each other, and we literally can't communicate with ourselves. We can't do it. If every time we seek to define something, it sort of slips off and attaches itself to someone else. So I need to recognize that all of those terms must be intelligible and understandable and be defined as one thing, both individually and as a statement. Well, the law of contradiction tells me that I, Matt, cannot both be a married man and a not married man at the same time in the same way, right? In other words, it's nonsensical for me to say I'm a married bachelor. It doesn't make sense in a literal sense. It's like saying I'm a circular square, or I'm a no-yes. I'm a yes-no. It doesn't make sense. I can say it, but it's engaging in absurdity. So in order for that statement to be intelligible, I have to necessarily recognize that I cannot be both of this state married and not of this state married at the same time the same way. Finally, the law of excluded middle tells me that given the definition that I've established, it's either the case that I'm a married man, or it's the case that I'm not a married man. One of those two has to be true. I can't split the difference. I can't be married-ish, right? Or bachelor-like. It's either the case that I'm married or I'm not married, given the definitions of what those terms mean. Okay, now again, this sounds elementary and odd. I thought I came to learn about theology. Why am I diagramming a sentence according to the three laws of logic? We'll get to that in a second. The basic point here is that, look, for us to formulate any thought whatsoever at a simple level and then to put those thoughts together in hierarchical structures so that we start to have complex understanding of our world, of who I am, of who you are, of what it is to live in a society, of what it is to live in a state, of what it is to live in a planet, of what it is to be in a church. We start putting all these ideas together and trying to relate them to each other. The only way that that's possible is if we're using the three laws of logic. We literally can't think thought. We can't speak speech. We can't formulate words and string them together with any kind of linguistic coherence without these laws. We need them. Full stop. Well, let's apply the three laws of logic to the claim that there is no objective truth. Remember, that's what we started off with. That's what we wanted to test, to see if that makes sense, to say that there's no objective truth. Now we've got our tools. Let's run them through to see what the output is. So, the law of identity requires that we recognize that the statement that there is no objective truth, that I must have a definition, a fixed definition for there, and is, and no, and objective, and truth. That those must actually correspond and be fixed on one concept for each one. So I can't be slippery here. I can't let them just sort of move around according to my desire, according to my will. It's got to stay. In order for me to make this statement, I've got to pin those definitions down. Well, the law of contradiction then tells me that there is no objective truth, cannot contain within it the statement that there is objective truth. In other words, I can't say that my definition of objective truth or the meaning of the statement there is no objective truth means there is no and there is objective truth at the same time in the same way. That would be a no yes. That would be the circular square. That would be the married bachelor, right? So I can't say that there both is objective truth and there's not objective truth at the same time the same way. And that points to the third one. It's either one or the other, right? It's either the case that there's truth or it's the case that there's no truth. We can't split that difference. So either there is a universal truth that is fact true, or it's the case that there's no universal truth that is in fact true. So maybe you can see where this is going. What's the upshot of all of this? So again, considering the laws of logic, it's true that A, either there is an objective truth, or B, there's no objective truth. But you know what that means? It means that there is a truth about the truth, and we cannot escape it. It's either true that there is no truth, or it's true that there is a truth. Either way, it's true. We can't escape speaking about truth. For me saying to you, I don't believe in truth, or truth isn't real, I'm saying to you something that I believe to be true. Or even if I say to you, all truth is relative, I'm saying to you, it's true that all truth is relative, or all truth is subjective. I'm saying to you, it's true that all truth is subjective. Or you have your truth and you have my truth. What I'm saying to you is it's true that there are different kinds of truth. And you know what? Those truths are not just reducible to my own mind. They're reducible to the very structure of logic itself that's saying, look, it's either A or B. And even if whether it's A or B, one of them's true. This is all a way of saying, in other words, that we can't escape the question of truth. It's not optional. It's not something we can engage in if we're so inclined or if have the time. So, if that's true about the nature of truth, that things either are true or not true, well, we can begin plugging things into that truth and get some pretty great outcomes. So either it's the case that God exists or doesn't exist. Either or. Either Christ is divine or is not divine. There either is a universal morality or it's universally the case that there is no universal morality. There's either life after death or there's no life after death. We either have a soul or we don't have a soul. The Catholic Church is either the one true church or it's not the true church. Now, this doesn't tell us what the right answer to those questions is, not at all. But it does tell us that there is a right answer. It doesn't tell us what it is, but it tells us that there is one. And that is a very firm foundation upon which we can start building everything else. That there is a truth, that there cannot not be a truth with regards to these and other questions. So what we have to throw out the window now is this idea, sort of mealy-mouthed, mealy-thinking idea that there's really nothing we can say about these things at all. Could be yes, could be no, could be maybe, could be somewhere in between no and yes and no and maybe, and it just gets so dissolved that our mind can't latch on to anything. No, again, at the very bottom, by the very structure of our minds, we have alternatives. And that is something we all share, no matter what our culture, no matter what our upbringing, no matter what our language. This is a feature of what it means to be rational. We literally cannot step outside of it, because to step outside of it, we have to use it. Universal disposition to question everything, and in that questioning, to be committed to never come to a conclusion about everything. That's the kind of skepticism we see, especially among teenagers. In order to be a skeptic, I have to know what it means to be a skeptic. It's okay, it's good to be a skeptic and asking for evidence, but no one, literally no one, can be an absolute skeptic. To say that we should not judge is to make a judgment. It's to come to a conclusion about what is right in the face of a potential opposite conclusion, which is that we should judge.
So it can be a real challenge to know exactly where to get started. So relativism, how is that? Is there various levels?
Being judgmental means feeling yourself morally superior or better than other people because of something that you possess. Making truth claims is not being judgmental. It's impossible not to make judgments when you are making truth claims. God reveals himself in Exodus as Yahweh, which translated, what? My name is I am. Jesus comes along and says, my name is the truth. The truth is always simple and obvious. It's not. And the path of salvation is not taking a shortcut around it or dangling above, but walking right through it. And so there are